I lived in a beautiful mansion for most of my life. By the time I was 50, I had everything I could ask for: money, luxury, and a perfect life. But things changed the day my brother decided to visit. He came to stay for a night, and that night turned my life upside down. I went from living in a mansion to living on the streets with just my cats. It wasn't my fault, though. My husband was much smarter than we both were. My name is Lisa. I've spent the majority of my life living in luxury. The grand mansion I called home for decades was more than just a house. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for. Everything seemed perfect. My husband, Jack, was successful, charismatic, and always striving for more. We lived in a life of comfort, surrounded by beautiful things and the luxury that most people only dream of. By the time I turned 50, I had everything I could ever want. Or so I thought. My life was as comfortable as it could be. I woke up every day to the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of the gardener trimming the hedges, and the view of the sunrise over the perfectly manicured lawn. But for all the beauty surrounding me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Jack had grown more distant over the years, consumed by work and his ambition. The gap between us had been widening for some time, and I didn't know how to bridge it. Then came my brother, Ben. He was a free spirit, unlike Jack, who was always calculating and focused. Ben was the life of the party, always the one to bring a smile to my face when things felt heavy. He had been away for a while, living in various cities and countries, trying to make a career out of his modeling work. He was always good-looking, with the kind of jawline that could have been carved out of stone and the eyes that could melt anyone's heart. Even at 35, Ben had an almost magnetic charm, an allure that drew people in. I hadn't seen him in nearly 3 years when he called one evening, asking if he could stay for a night while he was in town. Of course, I was excited. It had been far too long since I had spent time with him, and I was eager to catch up. When Ben arrived, it felt like nothing had changed. He was still the same, joking around, laughing at my bad jokes, and regaling me with stories from his travels. I felt like I had my old brother back. Jack was out on business, so it was just me and Ben for the evening. It was a rare opportunity for us to have some quality time together. We had dinner, drank some wine, and talked about everything. Ben shared stories from his modeling gigs, the places he'd been, and the people he'd met. I was fascinated by how much his life had changed, how much more adventurous it was compared to my routine life with Jack. It felt like we were young again, back when we were both carefree and everything seemed possible. Jack didn't return until late that night, and by the time he arrived, Ben and I were tipsy from the wine and laughing about something stupid. Jack didn't seem to mind. He joined us for a drink and quickly fell into the conversation. But I noticed a shift in his demeanor. He didn't seem fully present, like his mind was elsewhere, like he was more distant than usual. But I brushed it off. He was probably just tired from his business trip. After a few more drinks, Jack excused himself and went to bed early, leaving Ben and me alone in the living room. It wasn't unusual for Ben to stay up later, as he didn't have the same early morning schedule as Jack. I didn't mind. It was nice to have someone to talk to, someone who understood me in a way that Jack didn't anymore. As the evening wore on, the conversation between Ben and me became more. We talked about everything: the past, our childhood, the things we had been too afraid to admit to each other when we were younger. We laughed a lot, but there was a strange undercurrent beneath it all. As we talked, I began to notice how close Ben was sitting to me, how his hand brushed mine whenever we reached for the same bottle of wine. It wasn't the first time he'd done that, but tonight it felt different. "I've missed this, you know," Ben said, his voice softer than usual. "I've missed us." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest. "Me too," I replied. "I've missed having someone around who really knows me." Ben didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at me for a moment, his eyes softer, almost searching. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it, but there was something in his gaze that made my heart race. I shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what was happening between us. "I'm glad you're here, Ben," I said quickly, trying to break the silence. "Really, I am. But you know, Jack will be upset if we keep him up too late." Ben chuckled, his voice low. Jack's not here. It's just us. There was a long pause, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if he was joking or if something more was on his mind. I tried to laugh it off, but the tension in the room was palpable. It wasn't anything overt, but there was something in the way Ben looked at me, something that made me question everything. Ben leaned forward, just slightly, as if he was about to say something more. But before he could, he suddenly stood up. "I'm sorry," he muttered, looking a little flustered. "I didn't mean to make things weird." I blinked, confused. "What?" "No, it's okay." But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. I could feel the shift, the air growing heavier between us. It was as if the moment we had shared earlier had lingered, like something had been left unsaid. "I think I'll just sleep on the couch tonight," Ben said quickly, his voice quieter now. "I don't want to disturb anyone." I nodded, though I didn't feel entirely sure what was going on anymore. I wanted to say something, to explain that things hadn't felt normal, but I didn't know how. Instead, I just said, "Okay, good night, Ben." He gave me a small, tight smile before heading to the couch. I watched him go, still unsure of what had just happened. It didn't make sense, but I couldn't deny the weirdness between us. The next morning, things felt off. The air in the house was thick with unspoken words. I had barely slept, my mind racing over the events of the previous night. There was a quiet tension between Ben and me, but also something else, a sense of relief that we hadn't gone too far. But as I walked down the hall, my heart sank when I saw Mark sitting at the kitchen table, his face unreadable. "Morning," I said, trying to act casual, but my voice betrayed the unease I felt. Mark didn't respond right away. He just sipped his coffee, his eyes glued to the paper. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I sat down across from him, the silence grew, and I could feel his gaze on me. "You and Ben seem to be getting along pretty well," Mark finally said, his tone flat. I froze. How could he know? Had he seen something? My mind raced with possibilities. "We were just talking," I replied quickly, trying to brush it off. "Catching up. You know, it's been a while since we've had some time together." Mark didn't say anything for a long moment, his eyes still fixed on me. Then, he sighed heavily, setting the paper down. "I've been thinking about last night," he said, his voice low, "and the way things have been between us lately." I felt a pang of guilt hit me like a wave. I hadn't expected this, but I knew what was coming. "You know," he continued, his voice hardening, "I've been away a lot for work. I've been busy, focused on everything except what's been going on here. But lately, I've been feeling something different." I stared at him, trying to read his expression, but it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice shaky, but I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Mark stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. His expression had turned cold, his anger simmering beneath the surface. He wasn't yelling, but there was a sharpness in his tone that made everything feel like it was unraveling. "Don't lie to me, Claire," he said, his voice tight with fury. "I know what's been going on. I can see it. I can feel it." My heart sank as I realized he wasn't talking about just Ben. He was talking about everything, the way I had been so distant, the way I had been hiding things, the way I'd let things spiral. I had been too afraid to face the truth, but now it was all crashing down. "I know about you and Ben," Mark finally said, his voice low but cutting. "I don't know how long it's been happening, but I know. I've seen the way you two look at each other. And I'm done pretending like nothing's wrong." I felt a lump form in my throat. I didn't know how to explain myself. I didn't know how to make things right. All I wanted was for him to understand, but I knew it was too late for that. "Mark, please," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It was just one night. Just one mistake. It didn't mean anything." Mark's eyes flashed with anger, and he slammed his hand down on the table. "Don't you dare tell me that. You think I don't see what's happening here? You think I don't know? You've been acting like I'm invisible. You've been living your life while I've been working to provide for this family. And now you think I don't notice?" Tears welled up in my eyes, but I couldn't speak. I knew he was right. I had been pushing him away for months, maybe even years. And now I had betrayed him in the worst way possible. You think I don't feel anything? Mark continued, his voice rising. I've been working my ass off, and I come home to this. I come home to a wife who's distant, who's been hiding something from me, and I don't even know who she is anymore. He took a step back, running his hands through his hair. I could see the hurt in his eyes, but there was something else there, too, something colder, darker. He was done. I can't do this anymore, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. I can't be here with someone who doesn't care about me. I'm done. I stood up, desperate to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Mark was already heading toward the door. He didn't even look at me as he grabbed his coat and turned to leave. Mark, please, I begged, my voice barely above a whisper. Don't go. I'm sorry. Please. I'll fix it. I'll make things right. But he didn't answer. He just walked out, leaving me standing there, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. The consequences. The days that followed were a blur. Mark didn't come back that night, and when he finally did, it was with something in his eyes that I had never seen before, something cold, something unforgiving. He had been to see a lawyer, and it was clear that this wasn't just about a fight anymore. It was about the future of our marriage. I tried to talk to him, to make things right, but he wouldn't listen. His mind was made up. And then it happened. The one thing I never expected. Mark walked into the living room one afternoon, his face set in stone. I've made a decision, he said, his voice firm. You're not staying here anymore, Claire. You're out. I stared at him in disbelief. What? Mark, no. Please don't do this. But he didn't budge. I'm done. I'm not going to live with someone who betrayed me. I'm done pretending everything is fine. You're out of this house. I could feel the weight of his words crushing me. The house I had called home for so long, the mansion, the life I had built with Jack, was no longer mine. It was like everything I had worked for had been taken away in an instant. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to say. The pain of his words cut deeper than anything. Without another word, Mark walked out, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room, my world falling apart.